Welcome to Season 7 of my podcast, Between Us, Stories of Unconscious Bias. This season, I speak to people in Mexico, America, Ireland, Sri Lanka, India, and the UK. I have stories that I'm sure will resonate with anyone, anywhere in the world. For example, how to be more confident, or how are we seen differently in the country of our birth, only because we don't look like everyone else. I also hear stories that are chilling, and I'm moved at how the speaker found the inner resilience to overcome their challenges. I hear stories of music, religion, and so much more. I hope you take away as much as I have when hearing these stories. Thank you so much for listening. I'd like to introduce Jo Huff. Jo is a confidence coach for women who want to lead a more fulfilling life, but feel that something is holding them back from being, doing, and having more of what they want. Jo supports them to reignite their interest in life, move forward, and achieve the changes they want to make by working with them to define their future with intention, overcome the personal blocks holding them back, and take actions towards achieving what they now want in their personal or professional life. Jo is based in England, as I am, so for a lovely change, we're both in the same time zone when we are chatting with each other. And I'm looking forward to hearing Jo's stories of her own unconscious biases and where that's taken her to where she is now as a confidence coach. Thank you so much, Jo, for joining me in this conversation to share stories of unconscious bias.
Thank you, Smitha, and it's lovely to be here.
So, unconscious bias, Jo, we should get clarity on those words first before we even think of your stories. I know you're going to share your own personal stories. I'm excited about that. But let's just understand what you understand by unconscious bias first.
Yes, there's a couple of ways that I see it. And the first one is it's similar to having a blind spot. So something that we can't see but should be able to, a distorted view that we often aren't even aware of. And whilst we often can't see that unconscious bias in ourselves, we can often see that same bias in someone else, which I find quite interesting, that it's such a distorted view that we really can't see it in ourselves.
I think that's brilliant. I'm laughing, but I shouldn't, because it's actually a very important point that we have to discuss. But I'm laughing at all of us, including me, where we all create our own reality, don't we, Jo? And so obviously I don't have X or Y bias, but oh, look at her, look at him. And then there I am, twinkling my nose and looking at somebody else. Yeah,
exactly.
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So then what does that mean, though, for you then, Jo?
Well, so a bias, it determines the way we think and feel about others, but it also determines the way we think and feel about ourselves. And we often have many unconscious biases towards ourselves about who we are and what we're capable of doing and having in our lives. And often those biases come from our early years, and we've kind of grown uppitized them. That's not a word, but it's my word. We've grown uppitized these unconscious kind of distorted views. So even now, whilst we might have the personal resources, which would mean we don't have to kind of continue to think and feel and behave in those ways, we continue to do it.
And I love your grown uppitized. And the grown uppitized is absolutely spot on, isn't it? Because it is so much about, and what I say is our narrative, our life experiences, good, bad, and ugly. And based on whatever life experiences we have had, it becomes part of our DNA. That's what you're saying.
Absolutely.
And so you get to whatever age you are. And because from 0 to 20, you were told X is like this, you just keep believing it. And now you're nowhere near 20, you're now 40. But you still continue to think that without actually questioning it or addressing it in any way.
Absolutely. And I think, so many people kind of just accept those things. They don't realize or don't think it's possible to alter the unconscious bias that we have towards ourselves, even though it can completely transform their lives.
So true. So then let's come back to you, Joe, because you are where you are now. You're a confidence coach. You're helping other people transform their lives with the kind of coaching practice that you work with. But, what's your story? Could you possibly share a story of yours that got you to where you are now?
Yeah, sure. And, it's one of the reasons I became a confidence coach. So my unconscious bias about myself was that I was not a confident person. Roll back several years and I was one of the least confident people that you could imagine. I had zero confidence. I was petrified of doing anything, sticking my head above the parapet, walking into a room of people. So many situations filled me with fear. I avoided social occasions. I felt nobody would be interested in what I had to say. And as a result, I was very stressed and very anxious a lot of the time. And my unconscious bias about who I was and what I was capable of was absolutely keeping me in that space, because it became a self-fulfilling prophecy. And my thoughts and feelings about, everything being frightening drove my behavior. And because I didn't believe I was confident, I didn't act in a confident way. And then that just reinforced the belief that I wasn't a confident person.
But then to go back to the question that comes to mind when you're saying that, Joe, is what was there, if you can share, in your early years that made you believe that you were not a confident person, that made you fearful? I mean, did you have some sort of life-changing experience that made you think, actually, I'm scared all the time, and then it became part of your DNA?
No, and that's a really interesting point, that there was nothing life-changing. But what there was is the people around me as a small child, when I was a small child and, they were of similar age. It was small things. It was kind of telling me that I wasn't good at something, or even teachers, telling you, well, you could have tried harder or you should have done better at that. And you kind of build up, and I built up these just small things bit by bit by bit that led me to a stage of thinking, well, I'm just no good at anything and I'm just not confident and everything fills me with fear. So I think for some people, it is a life-changing thing that happens, an event that happens. But for me, it was just a number of small things that happened continuously that just kind of almost knocked that confidence and knocked it a bit more.
And in some ways, that's even more traumatic, because it's not just a one event of huge trauma that changes the way you think. It is so insidious and so little in the larger scheme of things that often people wouldn't even notice it. I mean, for example, perhaps you didn't come home, and correct me if I'm wrong, assuming that you came home to your mother, or perhaps you had older siblings, or your dad, some other adult who you were close to. You didn't think to come back and share it with them because it was too small to give it enough importance, do you think?
Absolutely. I think there's a couple of things, but as children, we kind of try and brush things off, don't we? Even though deep down, it's having more of an impact than we want it to have. And I think, secondly, as small children, we don't have the ability to believe that anything isn't true. So if someone tells you that you're not very good at something, you go, okay, I'm not very good at something. You accept it to be true. You accept everything to be true as a very small child.
And how old are we talking when you say very small child?
Oh, below 7. So, sort of nursery to preschool and sort of infant primary school age.
So that's very, very, very early years when you've left the full-time cocoon of your home and you're now for you, at age 5 years old, very much in a foreign place with lots of other little children. And I think
Yes,
it's those years, you're saying, that very insidiously started impacting on what you call grown-upitization. I mean, it became part of your DNA. I'm no good at anything.
yes,
And that kept
absolutely.
going. And you just continued with that unconscious bias that I'm not confident and I'm no good.
Absolutely. And I think we get to the stage where we think, well, that's just who I am. I'm just not confident. I look around and I see lots of other people who are obviously full of confidence, but that's just not me. And that's never going to be me. And you kind of almost just accept, or so many people just accept that well, that's just who I am.
But then I would put it to you, Joe, when we use the word confidence. Confidence means different things to different people, doesn't it? I mean, let's just look at that word first, because you work a lot with the idea of confidence. If I would say to you that I am a very confident person, but I am not, for want of a better word, an extrovert. I do not go out into a social occasion and I'm not the life and soul of the party. People may not even remember me after having left the room. But I know in myself that I am very confident. Is that then a contradiction?
Not at all. And I talk a lot with clients about, instead of thinking of confidence as a single word, thinking of it more as courage and resilience. So there's the courage to do things in the first place, to give it a go, to not let your fear outweigh the courage you need to do something. And then there's the resilience to, keep persevering, to bounce back when things go wrong. And those are the two things that primarily give you self-confidence as an individual. So for me, if I would think about my unconscious bias, it was more around the courage to even do things in the first place.
Thank you for that. Because that's really important for us to understand, isn't it? For the listeners to appreciate, because, they might be saying, hold on a minute. I mean, I'm confident, but I don't think I'm very good at X. And so it's a little bit more multi-layered than that. That's what you're saying?
Absolutely. And self-confidence, sometimes it's quite difficult to, what does that actually mean, as you've said? But when you say to someone, well, do you lack courage or do you lack resilience? They can quite often, quite quickly, point to which one it is that they know they're lacking.
I like that. That's a good lesson for all of us to learn. So let's come back to you, Joe, and to your story. So there you were, little 5-year-old, poor little thing, and in school, and children clearly telling you that you're no good at X, Y, or Z. And then over the years, little by little, your playmates say these things. And as you get older, you really begin to feel that that's who you are. That's what you're saying. And then how does the story continue?
Well, the story continues then. These things become reinforced in our work environment. So interestingly, yes, so my fairly early career, I was told that I would never really make a senior role because I lacked impact. So, on top of
Charming is all I can think of.
On top of, already lacking courage, to then be told that you lack impact and you're never going to succeed in your career, you're never going to be successful in a senior role. They just sort of, I guess they just exacerbate the kind of feelings that you have and continue to reinforce the beliefs that you have about yourself, the unconscious bias that you have about yourself. And interestingly, I did go on to make a massive success of my, career in the corporate world, but I guess it still had an ongoing effect or impact, I should say, on what I thought about myself, the unconscious bias that I had about who I was and what I was capable of.
Right. But I can't help but want to ask you a question, Joe, and you don't have to answer it if you don't want to. But what about family support growing up to when you started your first job? Were they also playing into the idea and reinforcing in your mind that you are not a confident young child, a confident young woman? I say young, and I deliberately continue to use the word young because you're still fairly young, new employee in X organization. Was everyone, joining in with that idea? Even the people closest to you, who you knew and trusted?
Yeah, and this is really interesting because I think as parents, we also join in with these unconscious biases. Joe is frightened of everything. Joe doesn't have any confidence. They kind of see the person that you are and they don't necessarily think that they're saying a bad thing. They just almost feel like they're stating a fact. Joe doesn't have any confidence. Joe is frightened of doing X, Y, and Z. And I have made with my children a really, really conscious effort to help them to build their courage to do things, help them to build their resilience around things so that they don't end up being as I was as a young adult.
Yeah, and I'm nodding because I just suddenly remembered when I was a child, I was called the clumsy one.
Yes,
And it was
yes.
probably because I dropped something maybe 3 times in a week or just by chance. And I remained the clumsy one. And even now, if I occasionally drop something, I'm talking about not with my family, not with my partner and my children, but I'm talking with my siblings and my mom. Oh, yeah, Smita's the clumsy one. Obviously, she's picked.
And they don't
They don't
necessarily
even
think.
realize. You are so right.
But they don't think they're saying it in a derogatory way.
No, not at
It's
all.
almost a factual way.
Yeah,
But
she's the clumsy one. You're the one
yes,
lacking in confidence. Obviously, we
yes,
know that.
exactly. So I don't think there was any intention by the people around me to not be supportive, but they just took it for granted, took it at face value, if you like, that that's who I was and how I was.
But this is something that for a moment, I just want to focus on that point, though. I mean, I'm laughing about it, you're laughing about it, and it's fine because it's fine for these stories that you're sharing, or I've just talked about clumsiness because we're over it, we're somewhere else. But there are stories, I'm sure the listeners might be thinking of their own lives, where they can say, oh, yeah, I've always been told X, and I've grown up to believe that that is not a good thing. And I'm thinking, for example, colorism. Certainly, in many, many countries, including India, colorism is rife. And if you are one of, say, 3 siblings and this color of your skin is 3 shades darker than your siblings, and the parents, the family, the larger family don't mean anything, but they might even have a name for you that could suggest that you're the dark one.
Yes.
And that then has such a deep impact in your psyche of who you are and how you see yourself. And it takes some courage. That's the word you used earlier, Joe, which I think is something that we all need to acknowledge. It takes a lot of courage to acknowledge that and then come out of that. Because it is so simply done and without any major trauma or tension or aggression, we don't notice it. And in some ways, that's even more dangerous than one life-changing event, don't you think?
Completely. Because one life-changing event, you can almost pinpoint, well, that's what happened and that's how it happened, and kind of almost recognize how you were before that and the possibility of getting back to that. Whereas with this kind of gradual build of small things, you get to the point where you can't remember being anything different.
So here you are now, Joe. You are a confidence coach. How did you manage? I mean, would you continue with your stories? I mean, I'd love to hear more.
Sure, yeah. So I guess, what changed for me was deciding that I no longer wanted to be frightened of everything. I could see it having such an impact on my life. I was saying no to more and more things. My life was getting smaller because I was just afraid to do things. And I decided I didn't want it to be like that anymore. So I had some sort of coaching myself with an NLP master practitioner. So that's neuro linguistic programming, which I can talk a little bit about. And was just so overwhelmed in a positive way about the transformation that it had on me, that's what made me decide that I wanted to help other people, because I had no idea it was possible to change these things until I had it change for me, and then thought, wow, I've just got to help other people. I've got to go out and show people that it's possible to change the unconscious bias that you have towards yourself. It's possible to change the beliefs you have. It's possible to change the behaviors that you have and to completely transform your life as a result.
But what made you want to do that? Because that's a brave thing to do, isn't it?
Yeah, and to be honest, I didn't even know if I had the courage to do that, which is a strange thing to say. But, there's one thing, recognizing that you're unhappy with the life that you've got now. You feel unfulfilled. You feel that you want something more. But there's a whole other thing in terms of, taking that step to go and get the help that you need. And it was just, for me, I knew I was on a downward spiral. I knew that I needed to do something, and I was struggling to see what I needed to do, but knew I needed to do something. And it was interesting. I just saw on LinkedIn, one of my peers had advertised a free coaching session. And I thought, well, I'm just going to give it a go. And if it doesn't work, it's fine. And if it doesn't help me, then okay. But I'm going to give it a go. And honestly, it was one of the best decisions that I ever made, was to go and have that first session and then follow it on with other sessions.
It's wonderful. Sometimes serendipity and wanting it and thinking about it all kind of
all
come together, don't
yes,
they?
Absolutely.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Joe. Yeah, could you share another story? I'd love to learn more.
Yes. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the unconscious bias around the link between masculine power qualities and success, because that's been a personal one for me as well. And we still continue to live and work in quite a masculine power oriented society, and with unconscious bias towards the skills and the strengths that come with that. What makes success? And that's really driven my behavior throughout my career. And I think it's still widely believed that to have significant impact, be phenomenally successful, we need to be structured and logical and single-minded and focused and fixed, and all these masculine power qualities. And the idea that we could achieve the same impact or even greater with feminine power qualities still has a really long way to go. And I started my career in retail over 30 years ago in a very male-dominated environment. And I quickly realised that if I wanted to be successful, I had to switch off my feminine qualities and start being more, masculine power driven. And I was thinking about sort of some of the stories to share with you. And this one just really popped up as being such an important one, maybe for the sort of listeners to see as well.
Please, because I've got lots of things going on in my head, but let's hear your story first.
So, as I was saying, I started my career in retail over 30 years ago. It was very male dominated. I was in retail management, and I was, very quickly told that I would have to be structured, and you have to have a plan, you have to stick to a plan. It's all sort of data driven and everything has to be done in a certain way. And I had an area manager at the time she was also very masculine power driven, but any behavior that I had that might talk about doing things slightly differently or allowing things to emerge or being a bit more intuitive about, how we worked, were very quickly stamped on. And I got to the stage with me where I kind of almost forgot those feminine power qualities and forgot to use them at home as well as at work.
Right. And so there are a few things that I want to just kind of pick up on and respond to, Joe. One is what we are calling the stereotypical understanding of what are considered masculine qualities and feminine qualities.
Yes.
Now, certainly in conversations that I have had, I have many an argument, I can assure you, on the fact that supposedly there is no such thing. And we now know, because the brain has been looked at, that there isn't a woman's brain and a man's brain. The brain is the brain is a brain. And whether you're a woman or a man, it doesn't matter. It is the same brain that we're born with. But because of the society we live in the world over, not just in the United Kingdom where you and I are living, but anywhere in the world, continues to be a male-dominated, patriarchal, masculine-influenced environment. That's what you're saying. People still have expectations of behavior that would be seen predominantly coming from men rather than from women.
And it's not really the gender, it's not really the male, female, it's more a masculine power or a feminine power, whether that's from a man or a woman. It's more the qualities that people believe equal success.
Yes, and in fact, we've seen that very recently when Hillary Clinton was standing for power to be president. And of course, she didn't win, but she was not able to match up in many ways. She was not feminine enough. And then she was equally not masculine enough. And these were
Yes.
the criticisms that were made of her. And Kamala Harris, I remember when she was a senator, she was accused of being too aggressive. When she was actually, all she was doing is being assertive, which would be considered. So I'm just trying to unpick a little bit of what you're saying, Joe. Forgive me. In terms of unconscious bias, what you're saying is that your unconscious bias, you so wanted to do the right thing by the environment that you were working in, that you changed your behavior from being what could have been a gentle, sensitive, fairly empathetic, good listener, that kind of person, to somebody who was far more focused, assertive, and so on. Is that right? Maybe I'm using the wrong words.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. My belief, my unconscious bias about what equaled success and the need to be very structured and logical and single-minded and focused was there initially, but it was also reinforced by other people's behavior towards me. So I went in believing that that's what I needed to be like if I was going to be successful, and other people reinforced that by their own behavior and also by their behavior towards me.
Confirmation bias, yeah.
Exactly. Absolutely. Yes.
And so you finally were able to stop and reflect and said, hang on a minute, I don't want to be like that. Is that what happened?
Only really towards the end of my sort of corporate career, when I was working more around transformation change and supporting people to go through change effectively in organizations, it was only then that I really started to tune back into my more feminine qualities, because I could see that that was going to help people a lot more than, you know, this kind of very fixed and focused and structured and logical approach.
I'm going to say something right now, purely because I have listeners all over the world, as you know, and there could be many men listening to this conversation thinking, hang on a minute, Joe, what's wrong in being structured and logical and focused?
Nothing at all. It's about doing what's going to work for you as an individual or me as an individual, and playing to my best characteristics, strengths, qualities, because that's what's authentic to me. And that's going to enable me to be successful because it's authentic and it's not forced.
That's the point, isn't it? Yeah.
Absolutely.
It reminded me of somebody I interviewed in one of the previous seasons, Husna Jalil. And she was a child when the Taliban were last in Afghanistan, not this time round. And she said she grew up thinking the only way to be successful is to be like a man. And that's what she felt. And it took a very long time for her to come to terms with the idea of femininity and masculinity and what that means, purely because she was growing up in Afghanistan. And that surrounding was just reinforcing those beliefs again and again. But to come back to you, Joe, yeah, I wonder whether you could share another story with us, because these are all connected, but they're also quite different in themselves.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it kind of links into the first story that I told about having no confidence at all. And it's about the kind of unconscious rules that we create in our minds about what we should do, what we can do, what is right, what is wrong. And I certainly had a lot of unconscious rules about social gatherings and events, and which ones I was okay to go to and which ones weren't
for
okay
example?
to go to. Even things like parties, people's might be as simple as going to a party, and I'd almost say to myself, oh no, I'm not going to enjoy that, or the people there aren't going to like me. So I'd kind of almost created these rules about what people would think of me, or in a particular setting, whether that was going to be right for me. And it was really starting to be restrictive, but I didn't recognize them as being rules that I'd created, rules that were self-imposed. They were kind of almost just thoughts that I was telling myself in my head.
I'm thinking of your earlier story about lack of confidence. And in fact, to me, all three stories are connected, not just the third to the first, because even the second story about wanting to have certain types of behavior that actually are not part of your natural instinctive behavior, was because you may have said to yourself, that makes me seen as a confident person. Perhaps you didn't say those words to yourself, but I'm just kind of making it up as I go along. You know what I mean?
No,
Because,
you're
and I can see
absolutely
that
correct.
connection. And then, of course, as a young person, when you're starting out and socializing, let's say you're 25 years old and you're invited to a friend's home, you know there are going to be 10 people there, and you know your friends, and you maybe know 2 people that you will know personally. Well, then it comes down to fear, doesn't it? Fear of the unknown. Oh, I wonder whether I'll know the other 8. So I'm not going to enjoy myself. And so then you start creating your own reality to keep safe. That's what we do with unconscious biases, don't we?
Absolutely. And that was one of the words that I was going to say. It was as though I was protecting myself. So, if I have all these rules about what I can do, what I believe I can do, or what I believe I'm comfortable doing, then I'm protecting myself, and protecting myself from feeling humiliated or feeling exposed or feeling unsafe or whatever that protecting myself from was. I'd created these rules as a protective measure.
And of course, none of these things may have happened if you had gone to that party.
I'm sure
but you're never going to know because you didn't go.
No, and I'm sure none of them would. And, one of the things I had to work really hard to do was to rewrite some of those rules around social gatherings. Was a really big one for me. Was I've got to work out, first of all, what are all these rules that I've created and why have I created them? And are they helpful for me, which most of them weren't? And then how do I go about rewriting those rules so that I can get on with my life and enjoy some of these things that I've been missing out on?
I want you to say that again, Jo, because those points you've made are extremely important. So, firstly, let me just help you recap, or you can recap along with me. First point you do is you say, look at the rules. Is that correct?
Yeah, you identify the rules that you've created.
That's number 1.
Yes.
Okay.
And then once you've identified them, it's, well, what for?
Why? So the big $1 million question, why have I created these rules? Okay, then number 3.
Yeah. And then it's about starting to think about, how can I rewrite these rules? How can I change the rules?
So what, why, and then how?
How, absolutely. And then the what if, I guess. So if I rewrite these rules, what does that give me? What does that open up for me? What does that allow me to start doing? And I quite quickly found that, I think you said just a few minutes ago, oh, if you had gone to that party, you probably would have had a great time.
Yeah.
I quite quickly found that I did enjoy myself, and that was quite a surprise to start with, that actually, oh, right, yeah, this is okay, actually.
No, that's actually good life lessons. And the lovely thing about podcasts is people can go back and rewind it and hear these points again and make a note for themselves. But so do you still continue to do that, Jo? I mean, do you have sort of a daily rule book that you follow to manage your own unconscious biases today?
So I do quite a lot of tuning in, I call it. So notice what I'm saying to myself, notice the beliefs that are obviously there, the little rules that I'm creating, the perceptions that I've got about myself. And tuning in is the bit for me that is the first step that I take. So tuning into those things. And then I do quite a lot of work on myself in terms of altering those beliefs, altering those rules, rewriting them, changing the perceptions. And I do absolutely consciously give time to that every week. It's never a done thing. We're always popping up with new things and, beliefs that you didn't even know that you had, and they pop up when you have new experiences, don't they?
Of course they do. And I'm glad you said that, because it never is a done thing. And we shouldn't want the listeners to think, okay, we do this once and then tick that box and we're organized and we're set. It doesn't work like that. It's a constant working. And the fact that you consciously put time aside every week to tune in, to check in with yourself, I think that's wonderful.
Yeah, and I think it's really important, in the work that I do. So, making sure that I'm continuing to develop personally is really important when I'm helping other people to do the same.
Absolutely. We could go on talking forever, but I think you've given the listeners and myself a lot to think about, Joe, because these are so much. It's what's so powerful about this conversation is that it would resonate with anyone, anywhere in the world, whether we're looking at Trinidad or Kabul or New Zealand, it doesn't matter. Stories are same. What do I feel about myself and my self-confidence? And what is it that I can do? So I really appreciate this. Thank you, Joe Off. I've really, really enjoyed hearing your stories of unconscious bias. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed sharing my stories.
Proud to announce that my podcast series is now heard in 104 countries, ranging from Guadeloupe to Iceland, Argentina to Palestine, and even Morocco. It is ranked in the top 3% worldwide. This is clearly a series that connects with people all over the world, and you are one of them. I thank you for listening. I would also like to thank Jack Godfrey for his original music in the closing of each podcast interview. If you like this episode, please do share, rate and review. I am Smita Tharoor. Until next time,